Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for taking time out of your Thursday evening and spending it here today at the North York Central Library. And thank you to the Toronto Public Library, the North York Central Library branch, and Elizabeth Lai, who graciously invited me here this evening to share some moments of music with you. This evening, we'll explore this beautiful instrument that you see before me, known as the tabla. And just by a show of hands, how many of you have seen or heard the tabla before? Oh, excellent. How many of you play the tabla? Even better. How many of you have thought of playing the tabla or have wanted to explore Indian classical music or just percussion in general? Wonderful. Well, thank you again for being here. And in this next hour, we'll explore this rhythm, we'll explore Indian classical music, we'll explore percussion, and we'll explore music in general. But we'll do that through the lens of the tabla, and I hope you enjoy. To start with, I'm just going to do a short piece for you so that you get a sense of the sounds that come out of the tabla, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it and where and how those sounds originate. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, the rhythmic cycle or the tal that we explored there was known as teen tal. And I'll come back to that in a bit. But teen tal is a 16-beat rhythmic cycle. And we're going to explore that together a little bit more further. But to explore that, we need to learn the language of the tabla. And what do I mean by the language of the tabla? Well, the tabla is known as a talking drum. And there are some reasons for that. One of the reasons that the tabla is known as a talking drum is that there's an entire language associated with it. Much like many other languages that we speak, be it English, French, Punjabi, Urdu, Arabic, Russian. Like many of these languages, like all of these languages, I imagine, there's an alphabet associated with it. And similarly, there's an alphabet associated with the tabla. The other reason the tabla is known as a talking drum is that when you're in the process of learning how to play the tabla, which is your entire life, once you start, you first have to be able to say everything before you play it. And for you to say everything before you play it, you need to learn the language. And I'd like to spend a few moments now to share some of the alphabet and the sounds and the language of the tabla. And for that, I will need your help. How many here know what beatboxing is? Does anybody want to give a demonstration to anyone? Beatboxing is, some say, the sixth element of hip-hop, in the sense that you use your mouth as an instrument, and you use your mouth as an instrument to create beats. And oftentimes, those beats are replicating drums, but not exclusively drums, but mostly drums. But you can play any sound that you want, even turntables, horns, strings, and some people even play the flute and they beatbox. Now, I'm not going to give you a demonstration of what beatboxing is, because that would be an injustice to beatboxing. But I do want to say that what we're about to explore is essentially beatboxing for tabla, because the language of the tabla is revolved around saying the sounds that come out of the tabla with our hands, but first saying them with our mouth. So for this part, what we'll do is we'll go over some of the sounds that come out of the pora, or the treble, and those were all the high sounds that you heard in the first piece. And then we'll explore some of the sounds which come out of the duggi, or the bass, and those were the low, deep bass sounds that you heard. And then we'll explore what happens when these two worlds come together. So I'd like to propose that first I say the sound and then ask you to repeat it after me. And as you say the sound, I'll play the sound so you get a sense of how the sounds that we say with our mouth are very similar to the sounds that come out from the tabla. You guys ready? Some of you? I see some heads nodding. I hope those heads nodding translate to voices coming out. All right, so the first sound that you get by hitting the pora, or the treble, is by hitting the center spot. And it's a very muted sound, and it goes like tuh. Tuh. Excellent. Tuh. 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 The second sound you get is by hitting the outer rim or edge of the pora, or the treble, and that sound is known as ta. 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 Fantastic. And the third sound you get is by hitting the space between the edge of the black spot. And actually, a little story about that black spot. This black spot is known as the shahi. And the shahi is a mixture which usually goes on wet, but it's a mixture of rice paste, iron filings, and ink. And nobody really knows how much of what goes in there. It's almost like grandma's secret spaghetti sauce. but the makers of the tabla have their own recipe by which they apply it wet, and when it solidifies, it creates these small grains. And the tone that you hear is actually the frequency at which those particles vibrate against each other. But for this last tone, you hit between the edge of the shahi, the black spot, and the edge of the rim of the tabla. And this is a more resonant sound where you hear that tone, and it's known as thin. 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 Now, similarly, there are three primary sounds that come out of the bass or the dugi. And the first one, again, is a muted sound, and you achieve that by just taking your hand and slapping it on the skin of the drum, and that sound is known as g. 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 Excellent. Fantastic. The second sound you get is by holding your hand in sort of like a C shape and applying a lot of pressure with your wrist and hitting with the tips of your fingers, and that sound is known as G. 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 And the last sound you get is by still holding that C shape, but applying less pressure with your wrist and letting the skin of the drum, letting the drum resonate, and that sound is known as ga. 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 Now, similarly to other languages, when we take the letters of the alphabet and combine them together, we get words. And in the language of the tabla, when we combine the sounds from the pora with the sounds from the bass, we also get words. But it being an instrument, those words happen to be sounds. So for example, when we take the ta and combine it with the g, we get a sound known as da. 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 And when we take the thin and combine it with the ga, we get a sound known as din. 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 Now these 8 sounds form the primary letters of the alphabet in the tabla. And just with these 8 sounds, you can do so much. First, when you start combining these 8 sounds, you get sentences, like you would with other languages. And these sentences we refer to as tals, or rhythmic cycles, similarly to the one I started tonight with, which was a 16-beat rhythmic cycle known as teen tal. Now what I'd like to propose is exploring these sounds a bit more, but starting to combine those to create a tal. And again, I'll say the sound first and ask you to repeat after me, so you indeed get a sense of how the sounds we say with our mouth are very similar to the sounds that come out of the tabla. You guys ready? Some of you are. Ta, 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 thin, 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 da, 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 g, 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 ga, 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 da, din, din, da, da, da. Da, din, din, da. Da, tin, tin, ta. Da, din, din, da. Da, din, din, da. Da, din, din, da. Da, tin, tin, ta. Da, din, din, da. You guys are doing fantastic. I think we should try that a bit faster. What do you think? All right. Da, din, din, da, da, din, din, da. Da, tin, tin, ta, ta, din, din, da. Da, din, din, da, da, din, din, da. Da, tin, tin, ta, ta, din, din, da. Da, din, din, da, da, din, din, da, da, tin, tin, ta, ta, din, din, da. Da, din, din, da, da, din, din, da, da, tin, tin, ta, ta, din, din, da. Da, din, din, da, da, din, din, da, da, tin, tin, ta, ta, din, din, da. Excellent. You know what this means? Faster. Da din din da da din din da da tin tin ta ta din din da da din din da da din din da da tin tin ta ta din din da da tin tin da da din din da da tin tin ta ta din din da din din da da din din da da tin tin ta ta din din da da din din da da din din da da tin tin ta ta din din da din din da da din din. Keep it going now. Give yourselves a big round of applause. You were fantastic. Now that you know how to speak the language of the tabla, I'd like to tell you a short story. Da te te, da te te, da da te te, dhag, tinna kinna, ta te te, ta te te, ta ta te te, dhag, dinna ginna. Da te te, da te te, da da te te, dhag, tinna kinna, ta te te, ta te te, ta ta te te, dhag, dinna ginna. Da te te, da te te, da da te te, dhag, tinna kinna, ta te te, ta te te, ta ta te te, dhag, dinna ginna. Da te te, da te te, da da te te, dhag, tinna kinna, ta te te, ta te te, ta ta te te, dhag, dinna ginna. Da te 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 da Thank you very much. Now, some of you may be wondering, aside from the tabla, what is all this other stuff on my table? And why is it there? And I swear to you, I wasn't just checking my email. Though there are probably many I need to get back to. Everything that you see on this table has been a culmination of 7 years of R&D. And what do I mean by R&D? Well, as you can probably all appreciate, many of our lives in so many ways are now integrated into the digital world. Things that we did a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, have all changed in significant ways due to the integration with digital technology. So for me, for many, many, many years, I wanted to see and explore what that would be like through the lens of the tabla. And 7 years ago is when this research started for me. I gave myself a small project, and that project was to digitally pitch shift. And why digitally pitch shift? Because the tabla is not only a percussion instrument, it's a melodic percussion instrument. And what I mean by that is when you are playing the tabla and you're accompanying someone, whether it be a singer or an instrumentalist or a band, you always tune the pora to the tonic or the root note of whatever that song is composed or played in. For example, this tabla is now, the pora is currently tuned to C. And the idea behind the tabla is, as I mentioned, you want to tune the tabla to the root note of whatever song that you're playing with. So one of those scenarios for me often came up when I was playing with DJs. Every few minutes, the song would change, and the tonic often would go from C to an entirely different note. So in the past, I would bring, if not 3, 5, maybe 10 portas. So as the DJs were swapping CDs or vinyl, I was listening for that tonic and swapping my tablas. But that project I gave myself was, how can I do this digitally? So after many years of exploring that one question, I was able to come up with, well, it led me down a path of exploring software and hardware development, which then allowed me to now, at a press of a button, change the tonic of the tabla. And I'll give you an idea of what that sounds like. So once I was able to change the pitch from one note to another, then I gave myself a second project. And that was exploring how to play melody and rhythm at the same time. And there are ways, and for many years, that has been done by, again, tuning the pora to different notes and playing them melodically. But the tablics exploration over these 7 years has been, how can we do this by integrating into the digital world through the lens of the tabla, while still playing the tabla as one would traditionally do. So the next piece I'd like to do for you is exploring this digital pitch shifting and melodic creation, but at the same time exploring how different worlds can come together. Not only is this a digital and electronic integration, but it's also for me an exploration in electronic music. So I hope you enjoy this next piece. Thank you. one of the most exciting things about learning how to play the tabla and having the opportunity to play the tabla is that it has given me an opportunity to explore people, places, and cultures from around the world. And there's many ways that we do that, whether it's through language, food, clothing, or being in a room with people from around the world and just conversing. For me, one of those ways amongst many has been through music, and specifically percussion. And it was on one such fortunate occasion that I was introduced to this drum that you see here before me now. And this is a melodic percussion instrument which came out 16 years ago from Bern, Switzerland. Its ancestry is based on the steel pan from the Caribbean and the guttam from South India. But again, it was designed, manufactured, and developed in Switzerland by a company called Pan Art. The name of this instrument is called the hung. And hung in Bernese German means hand, whereas the instrument, the idea behind it being that the instrument be an extension of the hand. It's made entirely out of metal, and I don't know how much you can see from where you are right now, but there are different indentations on the surface of the drum, and the size of the indentation dictates the pitch of the sound. And the larger the indentation, the lower the sound, and the smaller the indentation, the higher the sound. So again, different size indentations allowing different pitches, different tones. And again, through the exploration of melody and rhythm simultaneously, you can create various compositions and melodies. And I'd like to share one composition with you now. And I'd like to call this composition Ponderings, to celebrate those moments where we sit back and we think about things. And we all think in our own ways, or ponder, I should say, in our own ways. And this composition came out on one such pondering. Thank you very much. Thank you again for taking time out of your evening and spending it here today at the library with all of us together. And thank you to Elizabeth Lai and the North York Central Library for hosting us and giving us these moments to share some music together. And also to the Toronto Public Library, who is also supporting tonight and supporting a tour to a few other libraries in Toronto. And again, giving a chance to just explore music, celebrate Asian Heritage Month, and spend some moments together.